Hello, and welcome to the Hello You Show, where we talk about big dreams and taking real action. Through transformative stories, a bit of neuroscience, and real conversations, this show is here to help you explore creating your next level life with authenticity and passion. I'm Jessica Rice, a design techie and former engineering leader turned vision evolution coach on a mission to help other women rise up and lead a life of purpose. So get cozy and say hello again to the real you. Hello, and welcome back to the Hello You Show. My name is Jessica Rice, and I am your host today. And we are joined by a very special guest. I am so excited to bring her onto the show, Lisa Vortman, who is so inspiring and creative. And I'm just so excited to have her share her wisdom with us today. And so just to tell you a little bit about Lisa, she is a vivacious photographer and leader who advocates for giving time and keeping it real with ourselves, with others, and through the art of living. Lisa has worked over a decade as a commercial and editorial photographer, joining alongside passionate individuals and brands to encourage honest expression through visuals. She understands the impact photography has in marketing and is devoted to working consciously and creatively to amplify the messaging of those who are providing experiences, products, and services. And so from the moment you engage with an artist, you will be exploring the path forward with unique insight and genuine connection and optimism. So Lisa, I'm so thrilled to have you come on. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So I know that you have this amazing background and you've done all of these amazing creative endeavors and work with a lot of different brands. And so I just love if you could share with us a little bit just about your story and what it is that you do.
Yeah, man, I think every time I share like a version of myself, it's always a different story. And it's interesting how every time I'm asked, I'm like, what am I how do I start this here? How do I share it now? I think the best way I can talk about my story to sum it up for brevity would be that I am a creative. I am a photographer primarily, but to kind of start in the path of a career, I started doing production and producing, and that just led me down a lot of paths of really meeting people, meeting teams, and connecting. And it's allowed for me to kind of wear many hats, and one of which is really devoted to building a sense of community in spaces where competition is high and creativity can be constantly shifting and challenged. And so I found my career path being shaped really by photography and production, but I felt my kind of reprieve from that work in the space of yoga. And I ended up becoming a yoga instructor. And as of late, have been really dedicated to kind of merging those two worlds and finding ways to help people understand that the hustle culture and the kind of endless commercial wagon of production work can be really taxing, and especially for a creative who potentially is not necessarily as equipped for the day-to-day grind and wants to just create out of their own passion. And it's nice to have tools like yoga. It's also nice to have great marketing tools like photography. And so finding ways to marry the two, not only in the way I work, but with the way that I bring people together. So I'm at I think a really interesting juncture in my career right now.
I love that you're bringing together pieces of, all these different facets and pieces of yourself, because I think that's a big piece that sometimes we struggle with, which is how do I bring together all of these different interests that I have in a way that feels cohesive? And I think it's a struggle for quite a number of us.
Yeah. Well, and I think a lot of that has to do with, we're told to brand ourselves more than, I mean, in this generation, that's kind of the thing is, you are a brand. And I
Mhm.
resisted that for so long because I'm like, no, I'm just a human and I'm constantly changing. I can't be bound by like a brand identity I set 5, 10 years ago, because every experience I've had since then has evolved from that initial, perception of who I was. And so I think the idea of like having to pick a career or pick a niche and stick to it, even when it's not authentic, is often what leads us to a path where we're feeling the most at struggle with ourselves and our creative sides. And so being able to allow yourself to, be okay if it's not cohesive and know that you are who you are. And people may not get it right away, but it'll all make sense down the road, and kind of just trusting the journey and the process of that. I think there's a lot of power to it. Not to say that that's the right way or only way, but it's what I found.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think you're bringing up this really incredible point about how we create a brand for ourselves and this limiting idea of what that starts to look like as we're trying to shoehorn ourselves into sticking to this one particular brand. How do you feel that looking at it from the perspective that you have has given you the freedom to live creatively, to embody all of the different things that you're doing and kind of share that with the world?
Mm. I would say it's interesting when you stop trying to meet the expectations of what other people say are the way to do things. Branding's a perfect example of that. We're told that these are the ways you market, these are the different avenues and channels you market, this is the frequency in which you should market. Market could be posting on social, it could be email outreach, it could be newsletters or postcards you're sending, whatever it is. That consistency matters. And I think what we're finding more than ever after a whole decade of being told that is people are burnt out from that. They don't want to just be constantly sent emails. They want to be sent something that is enriching or that has meat to it. And so when you are constantly aligning with not what the expectations are, but what you're genuinely excited about or what feels right for you, people can feel that, and then they're more interested. They actually want to know what you have to share, because if you're excited about it and you're bringing it to them, then it must mean something, and I think you can just feel the difference. And I do think that it is really freeing when you can release yourself from the kind of expectations or the systems that have been put in place or that we've been taught.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really interesting perspective to kind of bring to the table, especially now that we are thinking a little bit more genuinely. I think we were used to for a while just kind of faking it all of the time, and I think all of the marketing and the advertising that we were seeing spoke to that as well. And then we kind of went through the pandemic, and I remember feeling at that time too this need for connection and this need for greater community, but also authenticity and feeling like I'm just tired of the status quo and being fed whatever, kind of from a marketing perspective, they thought that I wanted to hear, or kind of putting me in a box, so to speak. So it's interesting that you're looking at it from this other angle of how we can also view ourselves
Mhm.
and put ourselves out there.
Mhm.
I know we had this interesting conversation too when we were chatting last time about just this idea of creative living. And I was curious if you could even expand on that a little bit more for our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about friends of mine and myself included in this that identify as a creative person, the way that we live our life, the way we think about life, the way we kind of see things and experiences feels different to me than somebody who maybe hasn't nurtured that creative part of themselves. And we are all creative, especially women, but we are all creative beings. And so it's really just a matter of what part of you you're nurturing, right? If you are more of I think, an administrative worker, you might not be flexing your creative energy unless you're putting it into the way that you write your emails and you're putting it into words, right? And so it's just understanding where we apply our creativity. But when you start really pulling back from having to identify as like somebody who is a creative in the career sense, and you just think about the way you live your life, it's that exact same idea of freeing yourself from expectations and from these kind of boundaries that potentially stunt you from living expansively and being really present and engaged with your life. And when you free yourself, it opens your mind. I mean, there are days where, have you ever had, this is always a good example for me, have you ever had a day where maybe you were feeling just sick enough where you could call in to work and get the day off, but you weren't too sick where you could also enjoy your downtime? Like you weren't feeling miserable, so you got to actually maybe like catch up with like cleaning your home or getting organized or something like that. It reminds me of when I was a kid, it was the same thing. It's like if I could get out of school but feel well enough to play at home, then I was happy. And it's to me, it's that same idea. If you can free yourself a little bit, all of a sudden it's like you have time and space to do what you want. And then you start to learn about yourself. Well, what do I actually enjoy doing? What makes me feel good? And when you start doing more of those things, it generates a higher energy, a higher vibe. And when you start living from that place, you get more and more curious, you get happier and more connected with other people, and your life just feels very, very different. And a lot of that feels like the creative process of
Mm,
learning about yourself, of exploring and experimenting with different things, getting curious, and then learning and applying that into the way that you act, either the way you're creating something or you're just living out an activity perhaps.
mhm,
But it's just a way, it's a way of living that I don't think we were encouraged to, especially here in America, with the structure of like a 9 to 5 type of career per se, or maybe the certain kind of American dream outlined task lists or checklist items that maybe we were told were the way to go. So creative living really is, it's kind of breaking boundaries and allowing yourself to feel more expansive and authentic in the way you live your life.
mm. I really love this concept of, freeing ourselves. And like you talked about, I think that when we come up in our careers, it's 9 to 5, and we start to feel the rigidity of our lives, and it starts to feel stifling, like we don't have room for anything else. And so, because of that, we just stop exploring altogether. Do
Mhm.
you feel like that ties in with when people start discounting their own creativity?
Mm. That's a good question. That's a great question. I mean, I think that could have a huge part of it for sure. But there's so many things that contribute. I mean, to me, it constantly comes back to mental health. I mean, even the idea of a 9 to 5, I never want to advocate that the creative life and work is the way that you ditch your 9 to 5 and go do it, because we
Mhm.
need, you know, jobs are necessary and the work that we do, whether we like it or not, is necessary. And that's part of perseverance, and being able to do the work even when you don't feel like it is really important. And it's a
Mhm.
skill that I fear we are losing.
Mhm.
And I feel like it's important to advocate for that because it is an incredible skill to focus the mind and get things done. But your mental state in that is extremely important, and how you can reframe and shift your mind and change the narrative in order to feel what you're really aiming for.
Mhm.
And the discounted work part, I think, is the same thing. It's all about your perspective and then how you act it out or communicate it with others.
Mm. Okay, so that's a really interesting point that you bring up too, in the sense of the need to have resilience in what it is that we're doing. And so, would you say that by having some of that, maybe it's more grit, more resilience, and if we're sticking to the things that we know that we need to do, but then also allowing the freedom at the same time, do you think that would incorporate, allowing for ourselves to have greater fulfillment within our lives, within our careers?
Yeah, and I think identifying even fulfillment could have set expectations, right? People, because you hear other people talking about their fulfillment and you start thinking, well, that must be what I have to find. And so fulfillment is, it's such an inner journey of figuring out what that is for you. And I have to constantly remind myself too, because a lot of the times the work that I'm creating, is for other people. But when I think about why I do this work, it's just because I like connecting with other people. And if I can, do a job that maybe it's not my favorite job, but I could enjoy being around people while I'm with them and enjoy the process, then I'm happy in the work that I do. And so I think it's just understanding like what fulfillment really means to you.
Mm,
And because to me, like, yes, I'm very fulfilled when I'm on retreat and I'm reading a book and I have no schedule and no time clock. Um, but I find that similar sense of fulfillment doing other things too. And it's just, I think, constantly wavering based on, it's like a meter. It's like if I'm really getting close to burnout and I'm tired, I really am gonna know, I'm gonna like fixate my mind on the fulfillment being a retreat. But when I am really, really inspired, I have all this energy, my fulfillment is in doing and creating. And so I think fulfillment is never the same thing. It's a constant meter. And so it's a constant, like, where am I at today? What do I need? How do I honor that? How do
Mm,
I integrate it into my, like, the reality of the life that I am living, or shift and pivot as needed?
mm. So I'm hearing in here is really having self-awareness
Mm,
into our bodies, into our minds, and what it is that we need, and creating space for that work-life balance, and bringing in other aspects of ourselves and cultivating that intentionally for
yeah.
ourselves.
Yeah. It's a nice summary. Can I use that for my?
Feel free.
I'm going to bring you with me whenever I start talking in meetings and have you summarize.
Well, I know that you do a lot of work too. So you've done these photography walks, if I'm
Mhm.
understanding correctly, and taking people out, and you're encouraging them to kind of get more in touch with their creativity. How do you feel like that informs even some of this conversation?
Um, well, I feel like I've met and had a chance to connect with so many different kinds of people. And to me, it's this meeting of the minds. You're seeing where people are at. The more people you meet, the more people you see how it's all varied. And when you start talking about creativity, you can see where people either they light up, they get it, or they love talking about it, or they have a challenge with it or a struggle with it. And it tells you a lot, just even the way they think about creating and their process. It tells you a lot about them. Um, and it's a kind of a vulnerable thing to show that and experience it. But when you come together in community and you get to talk about it or experiment together, that layer of vulnerability or that layer of connecting is really cool. And you're right, I do photo walks with my partner Shelby, who runs narratives out here in Oakland. And I'm the director of APA with my board, which is a SF chapter of a nonprofit organization for photographers. And in both of those, the bringing creatives together component is where people feel the most lit up after and motivated and inspired. And it just constantly reminds me that, when you're a creative and you're kind of wrapped in your own mind for a lot of your days, a lot of your process, you can get a little lost in there. Our minds can be a really incredible place, but a really dangerous place. And so when you get out and you are with community, it's that freeing yourself from your own mind a little bit and gaining perspective and gathering information from others and other resources, and you get new ideas. It's pretty incredible actually to see how uplifting it really is.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love that you're kind of bringing creativity and the community together in this kind of original, way, and movement at the same time. So you're walking and you're being a part of creativity and community. And would you say that the people who are participating in this, and are they all mostly creatives, or is it varied?
So we definitely market it as all kinds of creative people. We've had people come on the walks and they'll sketch instead of photograph. We've had people come and just model. We've had people come and just kind of hang out and be around the energy. And maybe they don't work in the creative fields, but they know they enjoy creative people or creativity themselves. So it's definitely a range of how people identify with creative.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Well, I can see how it would be really inspiring too, because I think, it just seems like we've had so much, there's just so much happening in the world right now, and we're trying to make heads and tails and sense of it.
Mhm.
And sometimes we're just looking for something that can be more refreshing so that we feel more connected, and like we can belong to something greater that's beautiful and not ugly to some
Mm.
extent. When you're thinking about how you bring these different aspects of yourself, together, I guess I'm just curious, like how did this kind of start coming to shape for you? With you have yoga and you have photography and all of these different things that you're doing. How do you feel like, this started to come together, and what was this process?
Well, early on, when I was in art school, I felt like everyone always like nudged, like pick a niche. And I didn't really like it was people, but I didn't know what that meant. And so through exploration of just knowing yourself, because that was kind of the way to find it is, well, what do you care about? What is your perspective and your vantage point on life and how does who you are infuse into your work? And I didn't know for a while, but in just the pursuit of it, I ended up finding yoga and I just saw the effect that it had on my mind, on myself, and more so in the way that I work and the way people engage with me. And through that, and through becoming a teacher, I think I found my voice as just like a person. Like I found my beliefs. I found truly what I believe in this life. So when I started my career at 18 and went through college and went through like the early stages of finding myself in the career, it really wasn't until my late 20s where I feel like I actually understood who I was.
Mm.
And that is when things just started making sense. And that's when, if I look back at college, all the things I was instructed to like infuse my work with what felt real for me, it was just genuine connection with people. It was helping people feel like they could be who they were. They didn't have to, like, if I think back, I thought I wanted to get into fashion because I do love clothes and I do love
Mhm.
expression. I think it's very fun. But I don't necessarily feel like now I'm working with models only. I'm working with real people and I'm helping them express themselves through what they wear, how they use body language, what kinds of expressions they're giving me, what kinds of conversations we have. And in that exchange, it's the same way that I guide in a yoga room people to go inward and get to know themselves and move their bodies and kind of get grounded and get here and now and stop worrying about, well, how am I going to look on the other side and what am I supposed to be doing? It's like just what feels right for you right now and navigating how to find that. And I don't know, I do think that that's where I feel like I'm at an interesting juncture is I actually, to be totally honest, I don't even know that I've fully brought that into my work yet. I think that I had to kind of step back a little bit from the creative work and find it in myself. And now I'm actually, I think for the first time, really ready to infuse it into my work. And I'm starting to in subtle ways, but
Mhm.
I'm definitely eager and excited to see what I get to create at this next stage. I'm not totally sure what it will look like yet.
So it sounds like, if I'm hearing correctly, that you're still even evolving how
Mm,
you are creatively showing up in the
yes,
world.
absolutely. Always. I like to think that I'm always learning and shifting and changing. Like I can't wait to see who I am when I'm 80 because it's no doubt going to be nothing than, it's going to be entirely different than what I expect, I am sure.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is that's a good point to also, I think resonate for a lot of people, a lot of women. I think when we start to feel maybe stuck in
Mm.
our lives, stuck in our careers, we start going down a certain path or, and it starts to unfold in a certain way. And we start to think that there isn't much else that we can do to make a shift or a change, whether it's creatively or career wise, or even just how we're, leading our lives. What do is there anything that you would add to that or tell someone who's starting to feel like there aren't any options for them creatively?
Well, I think about it in the way of like reinvention or revitalization of like, have you ever had like a pea coat or a certain jacket that you love and you wear it every day or all the time? And at a certain point, you're like, I love this coat. I don't want to give it up, but like it's starting to shed or something, or there's these stains. It's like it's tending to anything that, has potentially been worn in a little bit. Like we have been through some stuff. Like we no doubt have carried some weight or we've, had to show up the same way for so long. And no doubt that plays its toll or role on us. And I think the more you can refresh and shift your perspective and realize that things don't have to be the way they've always been. Like we are given this life with conscious thought and the ability to be innovative and imaginative, and you can do things differently. I think the hardest part of that is just not knowing what to do. Like, oh, well, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I like. And that's where you really just have to let yourself lean into curiosity and you try things. And when you try them, you learn. It's either going to be something you do again or you don't do again, but at least you're shifting the patterns. But I think it's allowing yourself to take the tiny shifts. You don't have to change your entire life. You just need to find subtle shifts in your days that can help to accumulate into a pivot or help to revitalize or refresh your energy. I'm a big believer in time for self and to get into a state of mind where you're not consuming, but instead you're either releasing or you're just relaxing. And that's really hard to do for a lot of people. Trust me, that is very hard for me to do as well. But when you can get, and that's why I like yoga, because it's an act, like the movement part of it helps me.
Mhm.
Um, but the practice of travel, like even travel, people sometimes jam pack their agendas or they are so ready to let loose that they drink the entire time and they come back more exhausted. And it's like, well, where was the refreshment? Where was the revitalization? Yes, you took a break from tasks, but did you tend to yourself? Did you
Mm.
mend the holes and the little ripples or stains? Like, is there something that you can do for yourself to really feel refreshed and renewed? And that's for me where I've gotten really passionate with leading retreats, but and going on them. But I do think that you can do that at home, creating the space, or if you don't have a home that really supports it, being able to find a kind of a safe haven in a space where you feel like you can just shift a little bit.
Mhm. I love this idea that you're talking about too. And just even, creating maybe like a mini retreat for yourself or like a mini moment almost where rather than being distracted by all of the things that we tend to do, which is get on our phone or just veg out in front of the television, and we're not really tending to ourselves. We're not really being mindful or willing to sit, with ourselves. And I think some of us even shy away from that because we don't want to look at what's happening to our lives and what's happening in our lives. How do you
Mm-hmm.
feel that, maybe making that shift to tending to yourself and maybe even incorporating creativity and movement can help us to heal even that part of ourselves? Because I think there's a lot of avoidance happening in our society right now.
Yeah. Well, to that exact point is it's the being uncomfortable. You brought up like when you're actually sitting in silence, the things that come up, you have to face them. All right. Otherwise you're either avoiding them by busy work or doing. And really that stuff's never going to go away. But when you can learn to let the things come up and let them pass by. Like if you think about the way clouds move in the sky, like we can think about with the thoughts in our mind. Like
Mm-hmm.
you actually watch them, you actually see them going, otherwise you just know they're always there.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like when you do pause and look at your mind, you can see how your mind's just always going. And if you actually just let it go and you stop grasping at that one statement that just kind of hurts or avoid or really pushing it to the back and not looking at it at all where it's just going to stay there waiting for you, like when you just kind of let it pass through and accept that, like, you don't have to identify with every single thing that you think, you don't have to control your mind all the time either. Like you can simply sit back and breathe and look at color. I think one of my favorite things to do, and I found it during the pandemic, was like paint while I meditated. Like I would just watch the color. I didn't have a direction. I made horrible art. It was not great. I actually like it now, but it's not great art. But it was very therapeutic to sit with my mind and look at color and eventually get into a place where I got curious about the way that the color and the paint would move. And it's that kind of curiosity with sitting is really hard because it makes you feel things that are uncomfortable and it creates a whole other thing that you have to then process or deal with. But the longer you put it off, the more you're going to have to kind of feel it in other ways or deal with it in other ways. And I mean that by, some forms of avoidance are kept as tension in the body, which create aches, pains, or like actually you're incapable to do things later in life. And so you're gonna have to face it one way or another. So if you can find peace through that and that mindfulness, and I actually really love to say the mind freeness, like
Mm-hmm.
yes, mindfulness is a practice of looking at the mind, but can you look at it long enough where you can become mind free, where you can really just be entirely present? I think that's a hard thing to do, and it comes very rare for me when I get to actually fully experience it, but it's such a blessing when you can.
Hmm. Well, and you made me think of when, like, being a kid to a certain extent, and thinking about color, and when you brought up the clouds. I've
Mm,
done this even with my own son, where we're looking at the clouds and we're not really looking for anything particular. We're waiting for it to present. What am I seeing here? And we're not trying to control it. We're not trying to control a thought. We're just kind of opening ourselves up to whatever presents itself to us. And maybe the other person sees it and maybe they don't.
mm,
Um, and we do a lot of that work with like neuroplasticity too. And so when you brought up color, one of the exercises that I'll work with clients on is like how we focus our mind. So kind of getting away from like monkey mind into focus, which is looking at a picture or just looking at color. But I loved how you brought in like this incorporation of just actually freeing yourself from even trying to control your thought, but
mm,
also freeing it up and just being curious about how the paint moves, or what happens if you do this, and not worrying about the rest.
mm-hmm. And it's hard. I mean, you know, there's always a little ping when something comes up and you're like, "Ooh, there's something there." And you may not have the time to deal with it or process it, or get curious about it. And I think that's another hard part is, when we often sit and we are finally still, it's because you're usually tired and you finally have downtime, and as adults, right? And you're resting, and you don't have the energy to go down all the thoughts and the feelings and things. And so that's where allowing them to just be without your need to analyze them all or figure out why they're there, just accept that they're there. And maybe there are times where you can give a little time. Maybe you journal, maybe you sit with it, maybe you ask questions and get curious or talk to somebody about it. But being able to realize that you don't have to actually be in your mind to be refreshed. Like, you can really free
Mhm.
your mind and just simply be. You don't have to have it all figured out. And that, to me, I think, was one of the biggest freeing aspects of my like young adulthood, was realizing, I mean, I used to go down spiraling thoughts with my emotions and with my ideas. I had so many ideas of things I wanted to do in this world. And I would question, well, how do people make these decisions? How do I know what's the right way? What's the wrong way? And I finally just kind of broke that pattern of thought by just letting it be and trusting that, like, you know what, if this thing is meant to happen, it'll happen, right? If this thing is meant is I if I care this deeply, it will show itself again. It'll come up again, and it'll kind of probably keep coming up until I prove it, that it's not supposed to be here, and eventually get rid of it itself. But I don't know. It's an interesting, the mind is an interesting place.
Truly is. It's fascinating. And when you're bringing up thoughts, it's interesting because not every thought is true too. It's just
Mm,
sometimes we start analyzing our thoughts so much as if they're true all the time.
mhm.
And sometimes it's not. It's
No.
just it's just an idea.
Yeah.
How do you feel too, with creative outlets, and you're incorporating, body movement and yoga. How do you feel that ties in with your own creative freedom and expression, or even because when sometimes we have creative blocks, do you
Mm.
feel like that helps with unleashing some of that?
Absolutely. I mean, to me, movement is a really powerful way to get energy moving through the body. When we have stagnant energy, we often also have stagnant breath or stagnant minds. And so being able to move the body just generates heat in the body and new blood flow, which is regenerating in and of itself. And we create movements. It's actually like, I'm actually taking an advanced anatomy class just for fun right now to refresh on it.
Mhm.
And learning about how certain movements, like, because they move, and what the cartilage allows, like, the systems of our body actually are, through movement, made to regenerate. It's the whole, like, if you don't move it, you lose it kind of thing. It's
Mhm.
that exact, it's real. And the same goes for, I think, the way that we move through challenging times is you just kind of move, right? You don't necessarily wait to have it all figured out. You just move. And so I do think that the movement allows, like as a creative, when I'm stuck on either a work problem or a personal creative problem or curiosity, if I can just take a break from the thinking about it and I can get into the body, it allows for that shift. And when I return to it, I likely have a different perspective for some reason, right? It's just, it's unexplainable, but it does happen when I allow space for it. And I actually was just sharing that with a friend the other day who's, jamming and staying up really, really late, working on projects and was really tired and showing up the next day really tired for the project. And I said, well, what if you just had a night where you went to bed early and slept for like 10 hours? Just like let yourself sleep in. Like, what would that do for you? Like, how would that break the cycle you're in and shift? And he ended up calling me back and was just like, yep, definitely solved my problem of being tired and made a lot of other things easier. And it was just, it's the
Mm-hmm.
subtle things that we tend to overlook when we are really like really focused or in the kind of habitual doing patterns.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's interesting how we often deny ourselves because we feel guilty about it for some reason, or we feel that, we're not being as productive, or that there's something wrong with us for giving in to our basic needs.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we fail to see how that would actually lend itself in a much more positive way to all of the other things that we actually need to or want to accomplish.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, it makes me think about how, I definitely do a lot of things. I have a lot of people in my life who are always like, I don't understand how you do all the things you do. Um, and it's funny because I have a lot of quality time for myself. And for one, I don't have children and, my responsibilities on that regard are not, I feel like as big as some of my friends and some of the people I know, but, yet at least. But I feel like the the ability to take time for myself is actually the only way I can do any of the other things because I know myself when I'm not well rested or taken care of. I'm snappier, I'm a little edgier, I'm not as patient, I'm higher stressed, and not a lot of good things happen from that version of me, like to a certain degree, motivation and adrenaline and some healthy stress is good, but I know myself well enough to know, and I do think that there's a misrepresentation of a successful person or somebody who's doing big things that they're just going, 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 going. And it's that hustle culture and they're not sleeping and they're networking and they're partying. And like the people who are doing that, more than likely, something else is suffering, if not a lot of things are suffering. And I don't need to suffer more than this world. I mean, we have plenty of suffering in this world. Like I am not going to add more suffering to my own life. And I feel like there's a healthy balance when you take time for yourself that you can pour back into the things that you love to do and the people that you love better. And it's like, it's the same concept. We hear it all the time, right? If you're on the plane, you put your mask on first before the loved ones. So that way you can tend to them and tend to yourself. And it's the same thing. I really do believe that you have to take care of yourself. You have to know yourself in order to know what you're rippling out, because whether you're aware of your actions or not, they are affecting other people. And if you're not doing good for yourself and having a good relationship with yourself, you're likely causing some harm or suffering elsewhere. And I think it's our responsibility as adults to actually prioritize that now that we know more than ever before really how that impact is affecting our life and our communities. But I read this. I've been a part of a little study group for the Bhagavad Gita on Sundays. I just joined, and we are studying the philosophies and some tales and stories. And this one particularly just really stuck with me all week was, when your cup is full, potentially even overflowing, there's really no room for anyone or anything else to pour in. And so when you can kind of relieve and either fully digest or let it flow, however you want to think about it, but when you can empty your cup and let it be available, then you can gather from other people and let other people pour into you. And I thought that was just a really incredible metaphor for how often I have my own agenda, my own schedule, all these things I want to do, and I'm really, really busy. And then I'm tired and I'm done. And all I wish were somebody to come and take care of me, but no one can come and take care of me because I'm so busy. I'm so full. They think I'm out of touch and I'm out of reach because I have so much going on. But when I start making myself available, the amount of greatness and goodness that comes in and opportunity is it's really remarkable. And I saw it just this week through like experimentation of this story, but I think we've, we've put being busy on a pedestal for far too long. And
Mm.
I think people are starting to realize that not a whole lot of great things really happen there if we're not balanced out with the refreshing and you know, the other part of it, the rest.
When you were bringing that up, it reminded me of studies I had done with, with Key and five phase theory. And so some of that was coming up for me, but also this idea. So I love that you brought up so that you're a woman, you don't have children, and yet at the same time, women sometimes get pegged as like, oh, we're busy, and that's because we have children, and then we're busy because of this and that. And it's the same reason that sometimes, they won't get promoted in certain types of roles. And so once they do, whether they have children or not is completely irrelevant. Um, there's this guilt that starts to come up that they're not doing enough in order to compete or to stay ahead or to do these different types of things. And what I love about what you're talking about too is this freeing of ourselves up so that we can authentically show up as our best selves. And
Mhm.
so in that way, then we can actually we are true in our leadership, be more true in how we are present in our lives and can do the type of work that we are passionate about doing in a genuine way. And
Mhm.
so it's kind of this contradictory idea of overflowing our cup when what we really need to do is release it so that we can be authentic in
Mhm.
how we present ourselves as women in all of these different states.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I mean, there's so many roles that we all play, and especially women. And I don't know that I don't know that people talk about it with each other enough of just like the reality of what that means. And um, I really give so much respect to my friends who are really doing the most, right? And raising humans and raising children. Because that, I mean, that's my biggest fear, especially in my career as a photographer and in production industries. Like, you know, I know plenty of women who are mothers and don't really show that they're mothers in the industry just because of the assumptions that are made around what you're capable of or what your time capacity is or commitment levels or attention. And it's kind of a trip at this age and era to realize what I've heard from other generations. And I'm like, oh, okay, I can see what the tendencies are. It's definitely very sensitive as a
Mm-hmm.
topic,
Mm-hmm.
depending on where you're at. But it's important. And I know incredible moms and women who are doing the most and still taking care of themselves and taking time for themselves and they're loving their roles they're playing and not every day, they still go through the days and the months at a time or years at a time the way I do where I'm like yeah, it's not just because there's children. It's hard to just live in life and keep up with these promises we've made and these ideas and things we've committed to and responsibilities, whatever kind they are. Like, it's hard. It's really
Mm-hmm.
hard to show up every day with the same energy and just to keep it going. And then not to mention you have, teams waiting for you to tell them what to do, or you have kids waiting for them to tell you what to do. And it's not easy. But this is why we need more peacemakers and we need
Mm-hmm.
more opportunities to like balance it out and refresh ourselves because, we actually hold a lot of power. We are affecting so many people every time we step out of the house or step online. So yeah, it's really important.
Well, it's almost like I hear this message too for everyone, right? Men, women, regardless, because how we show up
Mhm.
is impacting so much more than just ourselves. It's
Mhm.
impacting the other people around us, it's impacting our communities, it's impacting our jobs, whatever that looks like, and our partners, families, all of the things. And if we would just maybe as a society look at things a little bit differently,
Mhm.
start to recognize that taking the time for ourselves, looking at our creative outlets, looking at how we are as humans and what our biological needs are, we
Mhm.
might actually improve. We might do better. We might, you know, what do I want to say, succeed even more to a certain extent. I think it's more
And
manageable.
shift for future generations too.
Hmm.
I think one thing too that I should point out, because I do understand that some people like time is hard, right? Like the free time you might have is the time after doing everything, and at that point you're tired, and I totally get that. There are days where I come home and I plop down and I'm entirely useless, and I'm like, oh, I have this time, I should be working out, I should be doing this stuff, I should be reading, like, and I
Mm.
just don't have it in me. And it's like the guilt trips do no good, right? Like the I should be's or I should have's or I wish I had done's, like those just continue to knock, like that's self-talk that's just continuing to knock you down. It's same as like the I'm gonna do it tomorrow, when you really know it's gonna be hard for you to do it tomorrow. It's like setting
Hmm.
yourself up to be disappointed. Like those types of behaviors, I think, are just as important to take a close look at and practice shifting as sitting still and resting. Like the way we take
Hmm.
care of ourselves is a bigger topic. It's not just taking baths and reading and relaxing. It's like, are we taking on other people's problems? Do we need to be doing that? Do I need to
Hmm.
fix this person's, so, add them solutions? Like one of my biggest phrases this year that is already coming into play, but I've had to start from January 1 was like, this is what I'm committed to, is the that's theirs, that's not mine, the let them, like that train of thought of like that's their lesson to learn, that's something that they're moving through. I can be there for them, I can send my love, I can listen, I can hear, I can ask if they want support or advice in the moment. But when I step away, I do not need to carry that with me, right? I don't need to let it sit. I can check in on them, I can send my love, but if I need to prioritize because my container is full and I need to find ways to empty it so I'm more available and present, like I need to understand what I'm carrying with me and what's important, right? What is mine to carry? What responsibilities do I have, or what things should I feel an obligation or a pride in tending to, and which things are not really mine to tend to. And
Hmm.
there's, I think, something circling around this whole like let them theory, because I started saying it and then everyone else is like, yes, let them. And I'm like, okay, so everyone knows this is where we're at. We let them. We just don't try to change them. Don't try to, control them. Don't try to fix them. Just let
Hmm.
them, lead by examples. Another great example of that is just like when you're right, when you're doing what feels right for you and you're being as kind and compassionate as you can, that's your way of being a good support, or being a friend or whatever, a good colleague, a good boss, a good whatever.
Hmm. I think that's
Yeah.
such an important thing because, like, I'm hearing like setting boundaries, really setting healthy boundaries for ourselves. We're not owning other people's, issues or challenges that they're there to learn and face for themselves, but being supportive. And I was thinking about this even the other day, was just how better, what a better way to validate someone else's experience as well, rather than trying to insert yourself into it
Mm-hmm.
and trying to make it your own or to fix it for yourself, but rather than just saying, I hear you and I see you and I'm here for you.
Mm-hmm. And it's hard because when somebody brings something to you, you do start putting yourself so that you can start to see where they might be coming from, and you want to, at least I would imagine you want to help. And that's, I think this is I don't know where I learned it, to be honest, but some of my favorite phrases are, do you want advice? Do you have capacity to listen? Right? Do you have the availability right now for me to vent? Like asking before you do it, I think I mean, I learned that early on in my 20s. I don't remember what book it was, but I used to read a lot of self-development books when I was in my 20s and finding my path.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned it somewhere along the way, and it really has been such a great tool. And not that I do it every time, but I try to, right? Really try to check in on what I'm bringing to other people and the effect it might have on them and what they're bringing to me. And to be honest, I think that stems from being a fairly selfish child. Like I had a lot of like possession issues, like what was mine was mine. I didn't want to share. Like, I had a lot of that growing up. And then I realized that wasn't right, and that wasn't winning any friends, like as a young child. Like I remember realizing like this behavior is not great, and I learned and overcame that. And now I'm like so to the polar opposite. I'm like, are you okay? Can you handle this? Can you not? Like now it's almost a little potentially too extreme, but finding the healthy boundary there somewhere where I'm at now. But yeah, it's important stuff. And I mean, unless you have women who really think like this and can get in conversations like these are things that you might easily overlook or forget just because they're not top of mind. You know, I have a couple friends, we do voice memos back and forth throughout the week. And just because the work that they're in is so different than mine, it's at a different pace and people think differently. They don't get in the same kinds of conversations. And so when we start talking, they're always just like, it's like a therapy session with you. And I'm like, it's because this is my world. This is the world I kind of simmer in. I spend a lot of time with people who think this way and who try living a more conscious life and understand the impact of their, presence in other people's lives. And I think when you start surrounding yourself with people who can explore these kinds of thoughts, it opens you up to your own behaviors and it opens your eyes to relationships, not only to people, but even to schedules and things that we do. And yeah, the one cautionary thing is just like self-reflection has a healthy boundary line as well, right? If you can constantly check in on yourself, that's great. But if you really self-reflect to the point of like you're judging yourself, you're criticizing, and you're trying to constantly refine and fix every little thing, like you're sending yourself down a really dangerous path of something that, is not necessary, truly, because at the end of the day, we're all just human. We're all just doing the best that we can. If you can just free yourself as much as possible and be as available and present as you can be, and live out of a place of like loving kindness, then you're gonna be good. We're gonna make it through.
And well, so as you were saying that too, it made me think about, sometimes women we tend to get together and then we start complaining. And
Mm,
you brought up this really interesting thing, which is not just having a self-measurement of what it is, not owning someone else's personal challenge and setting a healthy boundary, but also recognizing your own presence, your own energy that you're bringing and asking, are they in a good space for you to be able to vent? And what is it that you're bringing? Because I think sometimes there's this assumption that, I'm here and I finally can vent to somebody else, and we don't recognize what we're bringing into that conversation or what we're kind of dumping on them to a certain extent. And they may not, their cup might be full and they can't take on more at this moment, so they're not maybe even able to show up for you in the same way that you're hoping. So I think it's such an interesting, healthy way of looking at that. So I would ask, do you feel like that then goes full circle back to healthy mind, healthy body, intentional, practices and living so that you can get to that place?
Yes, but I think it happens usually in the reverse, right? Like you start by exploring your body, then exploring the mind and breath, and then that interaction outwards, right? How are you interacting with other people now that you've learned that about yourself or you understand where you're at, right? And it sometimes happens the opposite, where you don't even realize where you've landed through those practices, but then you're in a moment or an instance where you can point out where somebody else's behavior is impacting you and you're like, oh, I didn't realize I'm no longer in that space. Or I actually don't have, the awareness just heightens, but it does start first with yourself. And it could be through movement, it could be through reading, it could be through art or journaling. Like there's a lot of different methods, right? Like yoga was my entrance point to this work, and reading certain kinds of books was really helpful. But I really think that overall, like the journey looks different for everybody. It's just finding that self-reflection and that inner knowing for yourself, and then long enough to forget yourself and start seeing others. I think that's the key point. Is I would say I deep dove into self-development work in my 20s while I was kind of finding my path and creating my life. And I was probably around 27, 28, where I realized if I stay on this trajectory, I'm going to really start isolating myself from friendships and relationships and other people, because I'm just only really living with like my constant refinements or the way I want things to be. And I just know that that's not the kind of life I want. I want to be surrounded by people. I want to be able to connect with people. I never want to be so far out in my own world that I can't like meet other people and engage well. Like social awkwardness is a real thing and it's hard once you have it to get to come back. And like I've always known that, especially with the yoga world, like yogis can get real out there. And so I'm like, I've always been aware of like I never want to be unrelatable to like the people in my life. I want to be able to like have that connection and have it be strong. And so I think that that was when I realized like, yes, know yourself, but then like forget yourself, put other people first, give back. And that's honestly when a lot of my community work started happening. And when I started consulting and doing coaching for other creatives and leading retreats, is I just felt like I've learned a lot and I want to give back. I want to show up for others. And now I'm at this place where I want to balance it in a more of a harmonious way throughout my years, where I'm not only giving to others, there is that nice natural back and forth.
Well, it seems like you've brought everything really full circle for yourself, given what you were describing from your childhood and then even in your 20s, and now leading leading full on retreats,
Mm-hmm.
doing these photography walks. I've been doing all of these things within the community, which is beautiful and inspiring. And I love how it's like bringing people together, but bringing people together to become the best versions of themselves, which is inspiring. So I know you have some retreats coming
Yeah.
up. I'd love to hear more about those.
Thanks. Yeah, I have a Greece retreat in July 21st through the 27th. That is a female only or female identifying retreat. We're
Mhm.
calling it femininity and flow, which is a tongue twister every time, but so fun.
Mhm.
I'm thrilled. When I started leading international retreats, Greece was my first destination, and we haven't been back since pre-pandemic. So I'm really thrilled to be going back there this year. And then I also have a Mexico retreat called Integrate or Immerse and Integrate. Excuse me, my brain. This has been a lot of talking. It's so great.
Yes.
But I have a December retreat called Immerse and Integrate, and that's December 7th through the 14th. And on that retreat, it's co-ed. We do yoga, creativity. It's at a incredible resort in Puerto
Mhm.
Vallarta. It's really a very magical place. And we really kind of move through, especially since it's the end of the year, we move through a lot of this kind of reflection and time for self mixed with really great rest. But in order to integrate the lessons and insights we've gained from the year so that we can really understand how to apply ourselves in the next year, so that there is a shift or a more conscious growth spurt. And we're not just kind of perpetuating similar patterns, but integrating the things that we know about ourselves and how we want to move forward. So that to me is a really, really powerful retreat. That's in Mexico. We just opened registration. So we have about 15 spots available. And in Greece, we're almost booked. I think we only have 2 spots left. So
Mm.
yeah.
Well, both of those sound so magical and exciting, and I love this whole integration of self. So, how can people get in touch with you, or if they were interested in registering? What's the best place to go?
So visit the website consciouscreative.us and you'll
Mhm.
learn about the retreats. And you can also send me a message there and say hello.
Okay, awesome. I know it's been so inspiring having this conversation. I know it's been a lot of talking as well, but I just wanted to know, do you have a kind of final thought or message that you would like to share in terms of creativity or just inspiring other people to continue on this journey?
Mm. The first thing that comes to mind, and I'm just going to go with that so I don't overthink it. Just trust your process, but be in the process, right? Pause when you need to, but then keep going and just kind of trust that as long as you are aware and you are in care of yourself, you will find your way. And it's just an ongoing journey. But as long as you're listening inward and you're honoring yourself, I think you're probably doing the right stuff.
Mm, beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of these wisdom and the tips and ideas that I think that any one of us could take with us into our lives and just sit and reflect and think on a little bit more deeply so that we can be more present in our lives and maybe incorporate more of that creative living and see how we bring in more mind and mind body integration for ourselves.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was so fun. This are both conversations I've had with you so far have just been, I mean, we go down the rabbit holes, but it's like I wish we were having a slumber party because I feel like we would just talk all night long. It's like true, you know, good conversation. So thank you. I appreciate your time.
No, I've greatly loved it. And I agree. That would be such a fun summer party. You can just go on forever.
Wake
I
up in
love
the
it.
morning, we're just like a little raspy.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And for everyone else who's joined us, please, I'll put into the show notes everything related to Lisa Vortman and how you can contact her. And then make sure to join us again next Tuesday. Thank you so much. Thank you for tuning in to the Hello You Show. It's been a pleasure to have you with us on this journey today. If you found value in our conversation and want to support the show, please take a moment to like, follow, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. We'd also deeply appreciate it if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us grow, but also enables others seeking inspiration and authenticity to discover our community. Until next time, keep embracing your story with purpose.